every day to make this a safer city. Here in Philadelphia, we know how to get things done. We are sick and tired of being sick and tired about blight and deteriorated properties in this city.
Good afternoon. Sorry to hold you up. Here this afternoon to make a series of one set of announcements, and obviously joined by Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and the Chief of Staff, Everett Gillison. I want to thank him for his diligent work in this regard and in helping to ensure the safety of all of our citizens and guests and visitors and whoever is in Philadelphia at any particular point in time. I have a fair amount of information to share, and I want to go through the details of what this announcement is and what it is not, what it does and what it does not do. And I greatly appreciate the concern and diligence of many throughout the city of Philadelphia, whether from immigrant communities or not, who are concerned, and rightly so, about their family members and children, parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and the like here in our city. Sorry. At the start, let me emphasize that the city of Philadelphia is a global and welcoming city. Global in our desire to encourage investment by national and international companies, and welcoming to immigrants from all over the world. Philadelphia, of course, is a city built by immigrants, and our economy and our neighborhoods benefit greatly from our many newcomers. And we're a growing city, thanks in part to an influx of immigrants into Philadelphia. For almost a decade now, the city has been keenly aware of the difficulties some in our immigrant communities have faced and confronted as they try to cope with issues of crime and violence and other serious issues here in our great city. The fear is that in calling the police for help, or even calling the city for service, that somehow immigration status would be noted or accessed, ultimately by federal officials. In November of 2009, I signed an executive order that made clear that all Philadelphia residents, regardless of immigration status, have a right to access city services, and that it is not our responsibility to check on immigration status. In 2008, as many know, I also signed an executive order requiring access to city programs and activities for individuals with limited English proficiency, also known as our Language Access Program. In 2013, I signed an executive order creating the Office of Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs. And in 2014, just last year, a new policy with regard to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement regarding detainer requests. Those are just some of the things that we've officially been doing to be a more welcoming city. At the same time, Police Commissioner Ramsey issued an order supporting the executive order that I referenced in 2009, requiring police officers not to stop someone based on perception regarding their immigration status, or to inquire about immigration status for the purpose of enforcing immigration laws. That was a directive from Police Commissioner Ramsey. Further, officers were not to ask about immigration status of crime victims, witnesses, or others who call or approach police seeking help. In 2010, the city and the courts disallowed the department, generally known as ICE, access to court data on witnesses and victims of crime. And as I mentioned, in 2014, I signed an executive order regarding ICE detainer requests. The importance of this new order was this: both the police department and the prison system would not honor ICE detainer requests unless the individual was convicted of a felony of the first or second degree involving violence, and then only when ICE produced a judicial warrant signed by a federal judge. Those warrants, of course, are recognized all across the United States of America, and we are required to honor them. During that year, our administration, I individually, had conversations with the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Jeh Johnson. As mayor of Philadelphia, and many mayors across the United States of America, requested numerous times directly to President Barack Obama and directly to Secretary Jeh Johnson that the department end its Secure Communities program. They did, and then announced last year a new program called Priority Enforcement Program, which from a local perspective is much more flexible and more accommodating, particularly on the issues related to local law enforcement and community policing. It is very important to note that numerous cities across the United States of America petitioned numerous times that the Secure Communities program be ended because we believed that it was having a devastating impact on children, women, dads, families in its overbroad reach. And we said at that time, if you end this program and focus and target your resources more directly on violent criminals in our respective cities, I said to the President and to the Secretary directly that if you do that and create a different program, I will at least review and take a look at the executive order that I signed in response to the creation of the Secure Communities program in the first place. So I want to be very clear about the connections here. The Secure Communities program goes into place. I signed an executive order prohibiting virtually any contact with ICE because of the provisions of the Secure Communities program. And the only exception was if we were presented with a judicial warrant for someone who had a first or second degree felony and it was backed by a warrant from a judge. At the same time, I made a commitment to the President of the United States of America and the Secretary of Homeland Security that if you ended that program, changed that program, created a more targeted, narrowly focused program on violent criminals, I would in fact take a second look at the previously issued executive order, which is what brings us to where we are today. That review has been going on since last year. There have been numerous conversations and discussions with the President and Secretary Johnson in that regard. Earlier today, I did sign a new executive order that maintains our current approach to ICE detainers. I want to repeat that. The new executive order maintains our current approach to ICE detainers. ICE will still need a federal judicial warrant for the City of Philadelphia to hold anyone beyond the time that they would normally be released, and those two requirements are still in place. That the person has already been convicted of a first or second degree felony and a judicial warrant is presented to us in order for the person to be held beyond the time that they would normally be released. So ICE still needs a judicial warrant. But this new program also better aligns with the Priority Enforcement Program at the national level, and that's what our executive order is trying to address. There's one change, and then some positive additions. The changes in the executive order relate to new requirements for the city to notify ICE that it has a specific individual in custody. Let me repeat that. If ICE makes a request to the city about a specific individual under certain conditions, which I will go through in a minute, what they're asking for is to know when the person is to be released. That is the sum and substance of the proposed change. There are a number of additions as well. The creation of a new 15-member Immigration, Policing, Community Advisory Board, the 15 members to be appointed by the mayor. Equally important, ICE has agreed to our new procedure and is creating new links to the community. On the issue of notification, as I mentioned earlier, if ICE asks about a specific person who is already in the city's custody, so we are not talking about people on the street, someone who is already in custody for whatever reason, we will only provide information about that person's impending release under these conditions. The person is suspected of terrorism or espionage, or has been convicted of first-degree felonies such as murder, rape, robbery, unlawful possession of a firearm, or a member of a criminal street gang, or if the person is being released had prior convictions of any of those serious felonies. That is the narrow category of individuals that we're talking about, and all we will do, if asked about an individual who has that background, is allow them to know when the person is being released from our custody. As part of this order, we're creating a new board that will provide ongoing oversight of the city's relationship with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. The board will also act as a liaison to provide information to our immigrant communities, and it will promote dialogue between and among federal officials and our communities. At the same time, ICE has made a commitment by way of a letter signed by the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of ICE at the federal office in Washington, and the local office, that they will appoint a high-level liaison in the local office to work with our immigrant communities and establish a hotline to deal with complaints. ICE will also provide the city with monthly reports on its requests for notification, which will be public information. I also want to be clear that I fully understand that for some, any change in the 2014 executive order, there is opposition. And many statements have been made about any changes, although, again, there was no information available because we have been in ongoing discussions for months with Homeland Security and ICE. And for that, I apologize. But rather than put out competing or changing pieces of information, I wanted to put it all out at the same time. And so we will release, of course, the executive order, the letter signed by the three individuals that I mentioned, a chart and comparison sheet, as well as the statement being made today. Ultimately, this is about public safety, and we're very concerned about protecting all Philadelphians and making sure that everyone is safe. And under our community policing model, we need residents talking and talking freely with the police about safety issues in their neighborhoods. The executive order that I'm talking about today does not involve the Philadelphia Police Department in any way, shape, or form, does not change any of their policies and practices currently. Again, this is solely about notification involving individuals who are terrorists, involved in espionage, or have previously been convicted of murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, possession of an illegal firearm, member of an organized gang, or engaged in sex trafficking. This new executive order in no way, shape, or form impedes the free flow of information between and among community residents and the Philadelphia Police Department. What it does do, though, is meet our federal officials in a new partnership. It is a way for us to provide information in the form of notification regarding individuals who have already previously been convicted of very serious crimes and are already in our custody. Philadelphians in our neighborhoods can rest assured that their immigration status is not in play, is not a topic of conversation, and people should have no fear in this regard. They are not being compromised in any way, shape, or form by working with our great men and women of the Philadelphia Police Department in order to make our city as safe as it can possibly be, while also balancing the rights and interests of all of our citizens and people who are here in the city of Philadelphia. With that, let me lastly, before taking questions, let me read the most pertinent section directly from this executive order. In Section 2, upon request of ICE with respect to a particular person in the custody of the city shall provide notice to ICE of that person's impending release from custody only when that person meets at least one of the conditions set forth in subsections A through E. A, is an individual determined to fall within Priority 1, as defined by the November 20th, 2014 Memorandum of Secretary Johnson, United States Department of Homeland Security, regarding policies for apprehension, detection, and removal of undocumented immigrants, and presents a serious risk to public safety as follows. These are our conditions. 1, individuals identified by ICE as having engaged in or being suspected of terrorism or espionage, or who otherwise pose a danger to national security. 2, individuals being released from detention resulting from conviction of an offense for which an element was active participation in a criminal street gang, as defined by Section 18 of the United States Code at Sections 521A, or individuals not younger than 16 years of age being released after conviction of an offense that furthers the illegal activity of such a gang. Or 3, individuals being released from detention resulting from conviction of an offense that is classified under Pennsylvania law as a first-degree felony involving violence, or a felony involving unlawful possession of a firearm, or drug trafficking. Examples of such offenses include murder in the first degree, rape, robbery, felony 1, aggravated assault, felony 1, burglary, felony 1, unlawful possession of a firearm, felony 3, and possession with the intent to distribute controlled substances on Schedules 1 through 4. B, is an individual being released from detention resulting from conviction of an offense involving domestic violence, sexual assault, or abuse or assault of a child. C, is an individual being released from detention resulting from conviction of an offense involving human trafficking. And D, is an individual being released from detention resulting from conviction of any offense that the managing director or his or her designee determines by directive warrants notification due to the potential impact on public safety of the release of an individual convicted of such offense. And E, is an individual who has been convicted of an offense set forth in subsection A through D within the 10 years immediately preceding the scheduled date of release. Those are the very targeted and direct categories of individuals, and at the end of the day, what we're talking about is notification that that specific individual with those specific provisions, when their pending date of release is anticipated. That is the only change, in addition to the liaison, the community board, the hotline, and the monthly reports. From the news media, any questions?
Mayor Nutter, when does this order go into effect? And have you had any conversations with Mayor-elect Kenney about keeping the order in place?
To the first question, the order would goes into effect immediately. Secondly, Chief of Staff Gillison has had a variety of communications with people who work with Mayor-elect Kenney on this on any number of matters, but on this particular issue, and they have the materials that I've outlined just a few minutes ago.
Do you know if he has any intention of keeping the order in place?
We've,
Or it'll only last 2 weeks?
we've not had that level of conversation. I certainly have every reason to believe, based on his history, that Councilman Kenny, Mayor-elect Kenny, is certainly not a supporter of terrorists, those involved in espionage, anyone who is a murderer, a rapist, has abused women or children, or is engaged in human trafficking. But as you well know, I am sure he will be diligent and take his time, read through this, have further discussions. He may. I do not want to predict that, but may have his own conversations, certainly with the Department of Homeland Security and the Secretary. As I mentioned, I think I kind of alluded to earlier, but be more clear and direct. This has been a long process, and certainly from a timing standpoint, if we had been able to advance these issues some time ago, certainly I would have, but some of the issues that I mentioned, the liaison, the hotline, the oversight board, any number of those ideas actually came from representatives of different immigrant community organizations and resulted from a series of negotiations with the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, and that's been going on throughout the course of this year. But I do think in this particular situation, two things. One, I made a commitment to the President of the United States of America that if they changed their program or ended it and narrowed their focus to people who we all should really be concerned about, that I would in fact review our own policy. The second is, I think this is a much more targeted and direct approach to utilize the limited resources of our federal government to truly focus in on those who are dangerous, who are a threat to the law-abiding citizens in this city, and that we stand opposed to those who would bring violence to Philadelphia and not have them here, whether they are homegrown or, just arrived a month ago. So, yes.
Mark, who would you appoint to the 15-person board? Would it be people in your cabinet or people from the community? Are you going to appoint it before you leave office, or are you going to leave that after your discussions with Mayor?
Right. Well, the answer to the second part will answer the first part. I would not make those appointments, given literally where we are in the calendar, and would leave that certainly to Mayor-elect Kenny. Yes, Pat.
Do you believe this change has been misrepresented by groups that oppose it?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. I think, and this is our fault, or certainly our responsibility. I think when people heard that there was any discussion going on about a possible change, one might leap to an immediate conclusion that there was going to be some significant or dramatic, change in our overall policy. And I can't, I can't fault people for making assumptions about something that we have not put out the kind of detailed information that we're laying out today. I can't fault anybody for that, because this is a very serious personal issue. There are families that have been damaged and significantly affected by some of the policies of federal agencies. And I'd like to hope that the federal agencies recognize that. And part of that recognition was the constant petitioning by Philadelphia and a number of other cities to end the Secure Communities program in the first place. I'm not going to stand here and say that everything is fixed or everything is fine. But I think our continued diligence on this issue is certainly part of the reason that they ended the program and have now come back with a much more targeted, focused program, and are having this kind of discussion with cities all across the United States of America. And so, you know, in Dallas, in LA County, in San Diego, in Fresno, Monterey, Santa Clara, a bunch of cities, certainly in California, and a number of other big cities across the United States. Of the top 25 jurisdictions in terms of numbers of previously declined detainers, and the city, again, is still in that category, 15 of those jurisdictions are now participating in the priority enforcement program. It is a different program than Secure Communities. And I think, again, part of the challenge even for DHS has been how they communicate that information, how they get that word out, that it is a different program, that it is much more targeted and narrow, and that they're trying to work more in concert with local jurisdictions about issues that are specific or particular to that jurisdiction. Secure Communities was broad-based, one size fits all, no variation. The PEP program is different in that regard. But to your earlier question, I think if folks jump to the worst conclusion, you know, I can't fault anybody for that because people didn't have virtually any information. And even when we gave information, I think it was just hard at times to hear it and get it and still the worry that there might be something else. What I've given you is what it is. If they ask us about a specific person who has already been convicted of murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, human trafficking, et cetera, or is a known or a suspected terrorist, what they're asking for is that we let them know when they're getting out. That's it. Yes? There are federal standards for that. I'm obviously not in the federal government. You know, we can get you the regs and what the feds use, but I mean, it's not, I feel pretty comfortable in saying it's not, you know, I kind of think somebody might sort of have done something. There is evidence that needs to be presented as a part of the request, and then that'll be evaluated by both the police and prisons. Did you? Last question? Did you have something else?
What do you say to the immigrant community that says that that program is just a repackaged version of Secure Communities?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard that any number of times. I think that, you know, I think in response to Pat's question, I said the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, and I mean, I'm not talking out of school. I've said the same thing to Secretary Johnson. They have to do a better job at getting out information about what the program is, what it's not, and that Secure Communities has really ended. But it's also why, at least for us, what I insisted on was that they agree to communicate directly and better with community members. That's the purpose of the Oversight Board. That's the purpose of appointing a high-ranking official in the local Philadelphia ICE office who will be a direct liaison with community members. They don't have, there's none of that at the moment. There's no interaction. There's virtually no accountability. You know, or if people want to report something anonymously or have someone to go to. You know, XYZ individual, we don't think, you know, the charges are right or the background information is right or whatever. That can then get escalated up the chain of command through ICE, and there are people who have the authority to stop a proceeding upon that second or third level review. Those are the things that we've insisted on as a part of this executive order, and it is backed up by this letter signed by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, which we'll release, Sarah Saldana, who is the Director of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Thomas Decker, who's the Field Office Director for ICE here in Philadelphia. They are committing themselves to this process, and it is what we insisted on. So we'll see. Thank you very, very much. And we'll release all of these materials to you this afternoon. Yes, ma'am.
I think
I'm
that
listening.
what we've seen is that Pepcom has been sold to a lot of cities.
That what?
equivalently
Pep.
program,
I just didn't hear you.
which is essentially the community 2.0. Because what we see is that the way that this has been sprawled across the country is that you do get a dragnet program. So we're seeing it all over the country, that it is dragnet netting a lot of people because locally you don't have in place what you need for accountability, both with police and or with ICE. And you have our responses as a community that says that no amount of a body of community members who are going to be in communications with ICE has ever done any good. They've had liaisons at ICE before. Decker currently has, right now, people in detention who qualify for U visas and who've been locked up for 6 months with families out here. It is 3 days before Christmas. What we don't understand is how you can think that this is any different from another dragnet program that at the end will impact our community. Right?
Okay.
You have 2 weeks left. Right?
I understand.
You have 100 organizations across the country who have said no. What do you get out of this? Why would you do it?
To the last part of your question, I mean, it's not about getting anything out of it, so we need to dispel that notion or idea. What it is that I do in fact believe that simple notification upon request for a very narrow specified category of people. If I had a known terrorist in custody, or someone who's involved in a criminally organized street gang, or is, a sexual abuser, or engaged in human trafficking, I'm weighing the balance here of the request is about notification about their release. This has nothing to do with dragnets or snatching people up off the street. These are folks who are already in custody. That's the part that people are missing. They're already in jail, not someone who's driving down the street and, happens to have a car stop or something. We're talking about a very targeted, narrow group of people who are already known to be dangerous or violent. So, I mean, I understand that we have a difference of opinion, and I respect that. As a mayor of Philadelphia, my job and my role is every day to do all that I can to help ensure the safety and security of people out on our streets. And regardless of where we are in the calendar, that duty continues until the last authorized day. And as I've done before, with all of the executive orders that I mentioned earlier, it is always a balance between the safety and security of our citizens, as well as ensuring the protection of civil and human rights. But simply providing notification of someone's release, a narrow group of people under this set of circumstances, I think will not have anything but a positive impact on the safety and security of people here in the city of Philadelphia. I understand, I respect your difference of opinion, but I wanted to answer your question. So, thank you.